Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Saturday, November 26th, 2022, and tonight a special guest and I will be talking about the Grim Reaper. As always, you can find all the episodes of the show along with links to social media and other ways to contact me at the podcast page, and that is salcedoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions or stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. And of course, this is a bonus show, so the next show will be tomorrow night, starting the regular week. So Sundays and Tuesdays, I do true paranormal stories from the web. Mondays and Thursdays, I do paranormal news. And then Wednesdays, I do usually a book review of some kind and or a topic deep dive on the last Wednesday of the month. And the plan for this coming Wednesday is to talk about the Greek, ancient Greek ideas of the afterlife. Since about a month or two ago, we did one on the Egyptian ideas of that and the beliefs and all that. So that series will continue. It's just going to take time with everything else going on. But yeah, so that's the plan for next week. And thank you all for being here. I see you all there in the stream. And also thank you all who listen to the podcast and YouTube feeds. It's always appreciated. So, again, today we'll be talking about the Grim Reaper, and I'm very happy to welcome Jennifer Hawkins onto the stream.
Hey, James, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. We've been talking about this topic for a little while now. It's been about a month planned out, pre. I'm kind of excited to talk about it. And I came across a lot of strange things, even just kind of by accident, that tie into this. And so I think we have a lot to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we were talking before the show started just about how it seems like so many of us that do research into what seems like different things, we all kind of end up meeting in different places along the way. It's just pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's strange because it seems like we get all onto the same kind of mindset of where we want to go with different topics. And everybody has these different unique ideas. But then while they're researching those ideas, there starts to become like a parallel between the ideas of one friend or another. And then they kind of do tie together. And I don't know, it's perfect timing, really. And pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, I figure I'll start off maybe with this basic definition or description of the Grim Reaper, and then you were talking, like I said before the show, we were talking a little bit and about some stuff that you found. So I'll just go into this real quick, and then we can go on from there.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to look into all this, there's plenty out there online. There's just I have 3 articles I'm gonna go off of here, but really there's just so much out there. If all you have to do is look into this on your own, and you'll find I'm sure a lot of some of the same stuff that I talk about here, but then and then more, I'm sure. So but this this article here I'm looking at right now is from a website I need to look into more. It's Mythology.net, and I have to look into that more because I think that could be useful. But this article talks about how the Grim Reaper is the Lord of Death, black shrouded specter who appears when your time on Earth has come to an end. And that's another thing too that I found amazing about this is that a lot of people maybe would associate this figure with bad things, with a negative view of it, but that's not really the case necessarily. It really is. He comes when it's someone's time, and In some cases, it is just because someone has lived for a good long time, and it is their time to move on. So it's really amazing that this figure when it's described, it does look quite frightening in a way, but it's not negative, and I think that's a important thing and a neat thing about that as well. Because of course the Grim Reaper is this hooded figure, um, sometimes skeletal, sometimes there's nothing within the hood except for darkness, a dark void. At least in the body portion of it. Sometimes there is a skull that looks like a skeleton. Um, of course, the cloak and the hood wraps all around the figure, and it says it's loose and tattered, so that there's bits that move around when it moves that make it look almost spirit-like or ghost-like in a way. And of course, the signature item that it carries in a lot of cases is this blade, this curved blade called a scythe. A scythe, or I think I'm saying that right. Um, and that's sort of it's an instrument it uses to separate, to basically uh, take the person's spirit from their body, uh, into the whatever lies after that. So, but yeah, that's basically kind of in general. That's what the common perception of this figure is. So, but you were telling me, Jen, you found some interesting things here about some other connections to earlier texts, biblical and otherwise. So, if you want to go into that, that'd be good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the topic itself, when you're thinking about the Grim Reaper and about this death personification and how people over the ages, how they've described it or been witness to it, maybe even evaded it, like it wasn't quite their time, or they somehow escaped death, or they made a deal with death. Or you have accounts of loved ones looking on, or, being there at the deathbed and witnessing this on occasion. When you think about that too, a lot of times people are sitting with their loved ones for sometimes days and days and days, maybe even weeks or longer, just wanting to be near with them and see to them. In the instance where it's been a long carrying illness, or just as you said already, like it's just their kind of their time to go. But a lot of times family members will kind of stay with them, and they seem to be the ones, or they live there, who do encounter the specter that has been personified as the Grim Reaper. But then you also have many people too having accounts of just these what people would maybe think about as being maybe hooded demons or hooded cloaked figures of varying sizes, but the depiction of the cloak and it's seeming in some way that the garb itself, swathed in this like a funeral, like a shroud, I think is kind of what makes me think of. And I was doing research actually just about what brought this kind of strangely around is I've had it in the back of my mind about doing this show with you, but I was doing research too about these different groups and their beliefs about angels and things like that. And the angel of death, of course, comes up as one of the marked archangels. You have most people think about Michael or Raphael and things like that, but the Persians, the early Persians, they had this account of one angel of death that was named Duma, and Duma pretty much equates to doom, which makes sense with it being tied into death. But then I was thinking about that. I'd heard from a friend of mine in the past, several years ago, and they made reference. They were going into the priesthood, and it actually didn't work out, but they were in the middle of doing that. But they told me that an African priest who had come to the seminary would refer to them as the Duma, and it actually means in some languages bull. And I thought that was really interesting, and I kind of just put it on the back burner. But then I was looking into the concept that there's an extra canonical text that talks about Cain being, after he was and some people say he would never. There's so many different accounts when they're talking about these different lores and stories, and there are so many different types of accounts, and some accounts will say this, and some will say this. And in this account that I was reading, it was talking about in the folklore that Cain is actually he's slain himself. You know, he's the first murderer in those lores, and the first one to cut a person down, his own brother, or half brother in some accounts. So I guess starting with that, I found some weird congruences with Cain being thought of as carrying. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but that there were some strange congruencies with Cain and the depiction, some of the earlier depictions of death, as well as the angel, perhaps the angel of death itself. And many people would say that, you know, why would this mortal man become possibly an angel? That doesn't make any sense. And it didn't make any sense to me either. But in these accounts too, of these extra-canonical lore tales, they refer to that Cain was not the offspring of, and this is nothing, this is not a doctrine. This is like lore out of Babylonian Talmud and things like that of the Jewish faith. And they account that there's a possibility that Cain was the offspring, actually, of the mortal woman Eve, and a copulation with Samael, a type of demon, or maybe we'd say genie, or a fairy, perhaps. But that Samael wasn't an angel, that he was a type of a devi, a giant, a demon that may have been inhabiting the earth. And in fact, that Samael may have been the offspring of a copulation between Adam and Lilith, who had at that point become not quite human. So there's a strange mythology with all of that, where she's almost like an alchemical exchange of her soul in some way from having relations with these fairy or demons or whatever you would call it. But that the offspring of Eve with Samael was Cain. And so he's like a half human, half demon in a way. And that when he slew his brother Abel, that he did it with a certain instrument in a lot of the old depictions in the artwork. Because I wondered, is there a connection with Cain and possibly the scythe itself? And there is. Due to his agrarian works of harvest and the type of work that he did in his caste, there are tools that have been uncovered in the Near East in excavations essentially it's the bones of animals, in particular a jawbone, perhaps of a certain, like an ox or even a donkey, affixed to more animal bone or even wood that resembles a sickle or a scythe. And there are accounts that, in fact, it wasn't just a rock. In some accounts, that is the instance. Other accounts are that he just, in a fury of fists, accidentally slew him. And in other accounts, it was that he did use this instrument, this early depiction of a scythe, or sickle. And that's why there was the spilling of the blood and everything else. But then he himself, needing defense, when he was sent out into the world after God says that he, hears his brother's blood calling up from the dirt, or from the earth, I guess you put. And he says, well, if they see me, they will kill me. Cain says that in the stories, in the folklore. And so they say that God puts the mark on him, and the mark that he puts on him is horns in this lore, in several lores, actually, with the Jewish people. And really interesting, having the horns and the account of the Duma, the angel of death, being Duma meaning bull. And I thought that was very strange. And then he himself later is killed by Lamech and Tubal-Cain. And Tubal-Cain being an ancestor of Cain's, who mistook him for an animal. And interesting, Lamech is a blind man in those stories. But then too, that his ancestor Tubal-Cain, now there is metallurgy. And it's likely, because they carry on in caste systems to their family, that he may have used a scythe himself to cut down Cain, his whom he descended from. And I thought that was very fascinating that you have the depiction of the first murderer, and the idea of death coming to people to take them. Not quite a murder at all. It's a natural course of life sometimes. In some accounts, it's very positive, in some accounts, negative. But Duma also, in the Persian and the Sabian, the astrotheologists, the Sabians, and the Magians, they make reference that Duma doesn't take evil people per se. It takes all types. It takes everyone and anyone, and then they're divided up as according to their works. So I did think that was interesting because it just seemed to, do you see how it tied into, like, it's so strange how it tied into this exactly. Kind of by act. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. That is amazing. And just the idea, because I mean, so often you hear of anyone talking about I've heard people talk about before how they find, or they've seen like skulls with horns attached to them or being part of them, and it's automatically almost assumed to be evil. I've heard that before. And so that is odd. Also, another aspect I forgot to mention because I only saw it in one article, but Matzow brought it up, is that another thing that the Grim Reaper is said to carry with him is an hourglass. So that aspect of time, yes, and how much time someone has left, possibly, and or just the idea of it basically carrying time on its person, on it in itself, is also amazing. But yeah, the horn thing that seems like that could be a whole other show as well, in and of itself.
That's a good point he brings up. It makes you think of also Kronos, Saturn. You know, the connection that he carries. He carries a sickle too, a scythe, and he also carries the hourglass, being like the father of time. And that time itself could be personified as death because, of course, you know, after so much time, there is only so much time, as people think of it anyway. So I can see that there's a connection even with Saturn and Kronos too, somehow being representations of death itself. The mythology of it all, when we think about how people are interpreting the things that they see, and I don't think it's all just symbolic either. I mean, from the accounts that you sent to me and the accounts I've heard, and I've actually too, I've witnessed this when I was very little, that I did see a hooded. I had accounts of this when I was a child, and I have, through the internet and through shows, of course, the popularization of the hooded figures, that there has to be some type of connection going on where, I don't know if it's monastic robes or what the connection might be. But the handling of time, yeah, I think that's a very interesting point because it seems as if people have a predestination of how much time they have or something, or like the concept that this could already be known somehow of when your time will be up, I think is really fascinating.
Yeah. Also, the scythe in and of itself really, I know it's not like, it didn't come as a weapon. It was more of an agricultural tool, which is amazing. But also the curved blade. It comes to me that like if you turn that whole tool in a circle, that's basically the curved blade is almost part of a circle, in a way. Or it could appear as that if you were to, let's say, turn it in your hands or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and again, almost like a clock face in a way.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And I think the idea too of not just cutting souls down or cutting a man down or a person down, but severing the soul from the body, the harvest of the soul, it being in a positive way, that it is ripe for harvest. So I thought that was it is an interesting connection there. The scythe and the sickle seem to have a very strong connection with this. And you'll find in the classic English witchcraft and European witchcraft of Italy and Europe, and even now in the Americas, and probably in the Americas for a long time. But as we equate it with the modern witchcraft, the use of a sickle, the curved blade, in many magical rites, and considered one of the magical tools is a curved blade, unlike the They have different instruments they use for their rituals, and one of them is the curved blade for harvesting, for example. It's a working tool rather than a ritual tool. The same as with the scythe used by the agrarians of the past, and obviously by the angel of death, a personification of death itself. So I do think that that's interesting too. The symbology is just continuous through all these different cultures and times.
Yeah. Speaking of that, this other article that I found from Britannica.com talks about how the Grim Reaper seems to have appeared in Europe during the 14th century, and it was around this time that Europe was dealing with what was at the time the world's worst pandemic at the time, which was the Black Death, and so there's that connection as well in a way.
I can imagine when you think about, I think it was, well, the amount of population, I'm not sure the exact numbers, it was like a tenth of the entire world's population was snuffed out with the plague, the Black Death, you know. And so I would think that the whole villages just carting away masses and the amount of death and stench of death and the prevalence of it, and then the certainty of it for certain individuals and the sense of doom about it, that it would begin the skeleton, the depiction of the Grim Reaper as the skeleton in the shroud, in almost a menacing way of certainty that might have set into the minds, deep into the psyche of these people during that time when they were surrounded by it. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like for them. And to watch their loved ones waste away on the deathbed, becoming like skeletons. And I don't know. I do think that there's something very interesting about how it changed over to being this bleached bone figure in a shroud as well, still holding the scythe. And really strange too, there are accounts, of had the long beak, the plague doctor look. People had accounts too of seeing these plague doctors out with instruments that look like scythes. And some people have speculated that they were spraying something, but that they would use an instrument that looked like that as well. So that's very strange, because you see the plague doctor too, that has a strange feeling where it seems to also be, and they're wearing the hats and everything. But there seems to be some kind of connection too with that depiction, like a bird. So I don't know. I think it's all open to so many different interpretations of how a person, in their natural way, how they will encounter death and what the entity that they encounter, what they look like. And I've heard accounts of people talking about seeing a death mare. So where they see a horse that I suppose that they, after they leave the body, they get up on this horse and ride off into death. I have no idea, but it is interesting, just all the different depictions from all the cultures of the world and how they see it. But the Grim Reaper in particular, for the Western world, standing out so strongly. I didn't look much into the Far East for symbology in this, but I think that'd be interesting to look at too for anyone who's studying it.
Yeah, that nothing really showed up in any of those articles that I saw about that part of the world. But the funny thing you mentioned about the horse, the death mare, is that apparently some reports were that the Grim Reaper did ride a horse, and
Yeah.
So, and it was a pale horse. Also the bird. Well, there's one other thing. Other thing I want to mention too was, I wonder if the idea of the cloak over the skeleton image of the Reaper is almost to make it less frightening, but then because it's hiding something, it almost has the opposite effect to people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because
So,
is obscured, or people account that they see, like looking into the cloak itself. And have you ever seen a person wearing a hood, or if you wear a hood yourself, it's almost like blinders you have on like a horse, or they're designed just to look in one direction. So they're kind of with the cloak pulled up, you can always see what's kind of right in front of you. And so that's interesting too. That in lots of accounts of the Duma itself and the Angel of Death, that it calls the individual by their respective name, their full name. And interesting in the accounts of some of the stories you had, which I hope we can get to pretty soon. I
Yeah,
don't want to, but where they were talking about how the Grim Reaper would come to their door and even have a bit of a not looking traditionally quite like the skeleton in the shroud, but definitely wearing the shroud, the cloak, and the hood, and saying that they're there for this particular respective name placed there individual. So I do think that there's just a continual arc with that that follows the same type of paradigm.
Yeah. That's the last article I found, and we'll get to that. We'll definitely cover that. I wonder about I was listening to a show the other day about cemeteries and how, and I forget what time period this was, but apparently there was a thing within the like the design of graves with the skull with the wings, like the being used, like it carved into some gravestones. And
Yeah.
that's odd because that's almost like a bird or like something with wings is like something that's flying. And if you think of a lot of the ideas of where spirits go, they go up to heaven.
Yeah.
So that's really neat there.
Yeah, it makes me think of
Yeah.
there's a lot of the strange superstitions about birds flying into a house or a bird flying into a window or seeing a certain amount of the raven. And then too in the constellation, I have an echo. Can you hear that?
A little bit. It's not too bad though. But
Well,
I
I wonder
don't
why.
know what else I
Maybe
can
it's okay.
do.
No, you
Yeah.
don't need to do anything. I'll just log out and come back in or something if it does it. But
Okay.
when I was doing some research about the astrotheology and the stars, I discovered that in sidereal astrology, they have constellations that we aren't really familiar with in the West. One of them is the Corvus constellation, and it's depiction of a crow, essentially, and it's connected. Well, it's you just look up. You need to look up Corvus and the constellation, have a look at it, and it's riding the tail of a serpent. And supposedly, that constellation is the gateway to the underworld. And so you have this thing too with the reaching out into heaven and the references to what heaven might actually mean, that it could have several different meanings. And in lots of theology too, or lots of folklore, they talk about the seven heavens. People have heard about that. But they also talk about the seven earths and the underworld being another type of underworld somehow correlating to the earth itself with seven earths and seven heavens. But also too in Kabbalah, they talk about the 49 gates. But also, and I've talked about this before and looked a little into it, not enough because it's just such a big topic. It's such a big subject. It's almost impossible to even think about it all. But the reference there with Corvus, a constellation representing the raven itself as a bird of death, a black bird song in a way of opening the gateway to the underworld and perhaps to the dead in heaven there as well, but a bird representation there. Also interesting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is neat. There's so much there to look into.
Mhm.
But I think maybe now I will start to read one or two of these stories from this article, and I think I will put this article in the chat for people to check out because there's like I don't even know 4 or 5 stories, and I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but at
Yeah,
least I
they're great
can.
stories. I'm gonna mute up and listen in.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that, and I'll let you. You can do that, and I'll let you know when I get done, and we can go from there.
Okay.
So let's see here. I don't think that link worked, but I will get one. I'll get it for you all by the end of the show. I think it's because I have it in the reader mode there. But I'll just read a couple of these here. So this is an article from Mysterious Universe, which is a podcast and also just a website with lots of articles on it. But So let's see here. Here's one of the stories. This says that in one case, let's see here, there was a witness named Dale, let's say, whose mother passed away in February of 2013, but apparently leading up to that, his mother had been very sick in bed for the better part of a decade. So he was there again, like we were talking about earlier. And so around this time, as there was this illness going on, there seemed to be shadowy apparitions spotted moving around, and also objects moving on their own. That's the other thing with some of these articles, some of these stories. There's other odd paranormal things that go with it, which I wonder if that's because it just seems odd that there would be these other things that aren't necessarily necessary. They're not necessary for the transferring, let's say, or this process, but um, this activity picked up a lot in the days leading up to the mother's death. Dale said that according to this article, at night when she was in bed, his mother would see a person walk from the highway in a red glow until it got to the bedroom, and it would come through the wall and approach her side of the bed. Said it had a long black hat that came down to a point and glowing red eyes. So this is not your traditional appearance of a Grim Reaper in terms of what it's said to look like in folklore. It says that on February 2nd, his mother went to the hospital and basically came back 2 days later after some time in the hospital, and she was okay. But so let's see here. The family came there and stayed with her. And apparently that next morning, 3:47 in the morning, that the hour there, that 3 to 4 a.m. Apparently the mother shouted out to her son Dale and then his brother that she saw this being again. But of course, when the two sons walked into the room, there was nothing there. So let's see here. And then of course that next day, or that same morning, later that morning, as they were driving to the hospital for routine medical procedures, along as the vehicle was heading there, the mother passed away in the vehicle. And basically she passed away. She was gone. So this figure saw this the mother saw this figure and then passed. Also apparently around the same time, not long before this happened, the witness or the son of the witness had his own encounter along with his brother. They were driving past a cemetery and they saw this figure that was standing atop a freshly dug grave, and basically they just saw it was wearing tattered let's see here, looking at this here, it was large and had the tattered cloth on it, so basically almost like a hood, a cloak. And so that apparently the witness thinks that maybe they were seeing this figure as well. So let's see here. There's more. There's other things here. So apparently another story that says, I have my own story to tell of the Grim Reaper coming to visit a loved one. It was early 2000. My great-grandfather woke up one morning to tell us of a dream he had the night before. He said, the man with the sickle came for me last night. That immediately sent a chill right through me. It says he continued by telling us that the doorbell rang and apparently this was in this dream. And then when he opened it, there stood this hooded man with a sickle in its hand, and he looked at my great grandfather or grandpa and said he was um, he was there for this great grandfather, and apparently called him by name. And in the stream, this older man said that you had the wrong person to this apparition and slammed the door shut. So of course there's a little bit of levity there. But again, not long after that is when the this person passed away. So let's see here. So yeah, this apparently this activity in dreams and other activity around the person went on for the last 3 months or so of their life. So let's see here. Looking at the rest of this here, there's one I wanted to get to, and I think it's further down in the article here. So looking at this, checking on more. There's again, there's several stories in this article here, but there's one basically, and I can kind of summarize it, about this child that went on a school tour or school field trip, and it was near two teachers, and saw they were sitting on the bench, and they saw this man sitting on this bench with the two teachers, tall man in a suit, and as this witness was watching, one of the teachers fell over and basically passed away right there. And of course, I believe it was heart attack. I'm not sure now. I'm still not finding that place in this article. Oh, there we go. I found it. So, yeah. So the teacher had fallen over and was not breathing anymore, and this child saw this figure, but no one else on the site did. And even after everything had calmed down and everything was back to normal, this witness talked to the people that were there, and no one else saw this figure. So it's believed that they saw this Grim Reaper. So let's see here. I'm looking through the rest, and again, I think that's where I'll stop with that. But that's basically, there's a few stories there of this figure seen, and it's not always even in the traditional outfit of a Grim Reaper, but it seems to be there around the times of people passing and leading up to the people passing. So yeah, really, really odd experiences there. So Jen, if you want to join back in and just talk about what you think about this.
Yeah, it's like there's a quickening and there's a gathering of certain types of souls that are coming around these individuals when it is their time, or even when they don't suspect it's going to be their time. That's strange too. It seems like these beings themselves, like the banshee or something, there's this omen of seeing them, and then it brings about the event itself. It's almost as if the death is emanating from them, almost like if they come near the individual and they have their name wherever they get it from, and they have that your time is up. There's like this strange, just coming to collect, basically. Perhaps the idea of even in the redemption of souls, that it's time to redeem the soul. And the idea of, like, when you think about a coupon, it's a very strange analogy, but it's being borrowed or something, that the life that's in the individual is being taken back somewhere after it's been used for a certain amount of time. And it doesn't seem like it has to be necessarily just this Grim Reaper. I think the Grim Reaper is the most stylized of all of the different cultures because it's so widespread and the story has spread so far that it seems to dominate the accounts of these death angels or these agents of death. But it is strange to think that it seems like normal spirits of just regular human beings can also be said agents, said of the angel of death itself, almost like that is their job or something. And the people encounter these certain entities, people even perhaps, maybe in the case of wearing suits or this or that, where they look like normal garb, or it's a disguise of some sort even. There's so much with it, you know. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, but yeah, it is really amazing to think about that. And the other thing too, I've seen different shows, like different fictional stories that try to look at that whole idea of this part of the spirit world that is in charge of the transition
Yeah.
of people from life to the afterlife. And I have to give a quick shout out here to Jay in New York. He mentioned that I should look into, and I looked at the summary of it, but I didn't get into to watch any of it. Of a TV show he saw called, I think it was Dead Like Me,
Oh
and
yeah.
I've never seen it, but he mentioned that a couple of times. I just didn't get to watch it. Have you seen that one?
It's an older show. Yeah, it was around years ago, and then it was out. I can't remember if it was like Netflix or I don't know. You'll be able to find it, but it talks a lot about this thing we're talking about right now, and just the idea that there is, it does tie in very nicely to the concept that there is a whole an order of sorts that are in the ethereal world or even in our own world. So there's some strange, because in this case, the funeral director, that they are initiates in some way of, there obviously is something to the feeling that when you meet someone who works in hospice or works as in funerary, that they seem to have a closer connection with that in some way, and they almost seem to have an understanding of death in a way. And I wonder if too on the spiritual realm or something, if there's something to that, that they are themselves guides for, like they are, it's some kind of fate that they be in those professions, that they be into the position where they can do what would need to be done to transition the person into the afterlife. And then the concept of too that there might be, like I said already, like eight. I don't mean to be repetitive, but like the agents of the angel of death in a way that might be intended to handle the moving or transporting of a soul into a certain area of the afterlife or into a certain level of, say, heaven or the veil or to whatever, to handle all of that. It does seem like there could be an order to it, because the descriptions of all the different types of creatures encountered are obviously not the same exact identical being, but they seem to be the hand of the same force.
Yeah, yeah. Just looking at the chat here, Matt says everything we think we own, we are only borrowing it from death. That's true in a way. Or borrowing it from life, Apoc says. Um, and apparently she's aware of that show as well, that Dead Like Me. So, David 88, welcome. Says, I wonder if the sickle the Grim Reaper uses is to cut the cord that people see when they're astral projecting.
I
And
thought of
that's,
that too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking of something along those lines as well. Yeah.
Yes. Because they
Mhm.
say that it can't be severed, really. And there's a possibility you could be out too far if you're out of body, and it might, if you stayed out too long for some reason or something. But initially, basically, it's almost, it's a tether, so for sure you won't float off. But maybe they, yeah, perhaps with the cutting through the cord yeah, it's a good point. And I think that, yeah, we forgot well, we talked about the severing the soul from the body, but not in the context of people thinking about it that their soul is always coming and going from the body. And so, but so it's not so much about the soul leaving the body as much as that tether, because the soul obviously travels everywhere. And a lot of people's, like, I mean, a lot of stories and the way that people look at the world, that the soul can, we realize that perhaps there's a body that can go out of the body and go about the world and have many experiences in the dream state, maybe every night, but always comes back. So it's not so much about the soul leaving the body, but actually being detached, completely cut from the body itself. And I've heard people in meditation, many Buddhist monks in their monasteries, that other monks came across that the individual was meditating and had been meditating for so long, not as in like they died from sitting there for so long and not eating or anything, but that they had gone so far in their travels in the state of meditation that they came across them and they actually were sitting there in their position but had passed. I don't know if they voluntarily left the body or what, but there are accounts of that too, and it makes you think about the cord that tethers the body to its soul. But anyway, though, but the power to separate them seems to be held in the hands of these agents of, I don't want to say death, but transition and end to a certain phase.
Yeah, and I wonder too. I'm sorry.
Well, to be on the positive, that it's the scythe itself as being you harvest the crops when they are ready, when it is time, as in and that I don't think that this untimely death might be handled by completely different entities, as entities who, like when you think about the different agents of death and what they might be, that the coming with the scythe or the sickle, as in to harvest when the soul is ready. I wonder if there's a difference between taking someone prematurely or unexpectedly, if there are different beings in charge of that. I don't know, or if it's all handled by the same thing. I don't know, but it's just interesting to think about. And
Yeah, makes me wonder too if maybe there could have been at some point only one being, whoever or whatever it was, that was in charge of that. But as time went on and there came to be more and more people in the world, it it did give maybe or recruit some other being, some other people, either people or other kinds of spiritual beings to work with it or for it.
mm-hmm.
And then that's why, because again, those articles again, like you mentioned, they said that the Grim Reaper was only one manifestation or one view of this figure that's in charge of this transition. So, and I wonder too if there are multiple agents, then couldn't there be a whole variety of they could have a variety of personalities where there are some that are out there that are doing, let's say, the what's best for everyone, but then there are others, and maybe that's where you get your more negative experiences from, is there are others out there that are maybe just doing things the
Feeling
way
it,
they want. and
right?
and yeah, that's a uh I always wonder about that, because it seems to me like whenever you have absolutes of this one type of being, all of them are always bad, or all of them are always good. I always kind of wonder if that's really how things work, because if it's anything like what you see in humans or even other animals, there seems to be that there are some out there that are they're different. Everyone is different in how they act, and so I always wonder about that.
Yeah, and it's good to bring that up because it would make sense that you would have, if this is a type of, well, I don't, it's a lot to unpack when you're trying to think about, okay, so is there you have the case of the original, if you think about humanity itself and that you would have had an initial original death, the first person, for example, to die, or the first person to cause death, perhaps, that there could be there's some type of connection there through the human psyche that may envision it in such a way, and that it be personified with a true spirit of some kind, or a true type of entity that is traversing between the veils of our world and another world of some sort. And that there could be things that could bring about the cause of it, or that the beings could even be called up themselves. And then, so I don't know, it just goes, there's so much to it. And then when you consider the fact that by what mechanisms are we communicating with the dead in the instance of necromancy or through certain rituals, and that you may have to encounter these beings to even reach into certain dimensions, gatekeepers, as has been talked about in the past. And even in the paranormal world itself, that you have spirits that are locked into a certain location, and there is an entity overseeing them, those entity, the spirit, the ghosts, and keeping them in that location for some reason. So there seems to be all types of powers at work in the dealings of how we interpret death, how the living interpret the world of the dead. But I think it is, there's just so much. But well, we're doing our best, I think, to try to talk about it as much as thorough as we can. But you're right, there is just so much there.
Yeah, it's funny. This has me really wondering about my favorite movie of all time, Beetlejuice.
Hmm.
Where would some kind of a Grim Reaper fit into that universe as
I
well?
know. Makes you think what the receptionist, or was
Yeah,
it, yeah. I don't
the
know.
caseworker. Do you know the
The
caseworker?
caseworker, that's what it was, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's pretty neat. But yeah, let's see here. There's comments in here talking about Matt Sal says, "I like Death in the Sandman. She is always in the right place to take the souls." That's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very empathetic take on that character of Death. David says, uh, and yeah, APOC talking about that as well. Yeah, that's a good show. I recommend anyone that hasn't seen that show go check it out.
I haven't
Um,
seen the show, but I was looking at I used to have the graphic novel, and she's
okay.
depicted as like a teenage girl. And I remember she had like this face tattoo, and she was one of my favorite artistic depictions in the whole book. Like, of course, as a teenager myself, like that I thought, you want to emulate that, where it feels like you can connect to it in some way. And then her depiction, though, yeah, as just an innocent young lady in that instance. But I've actually heard accounts too that the Grim Reaper too has been switching back and forth in many of these stories too, between being feminine and as an in like a okay, like La Llorona, who comes and takes. It's a little darker aspect of it, but again, a spirit of vengeance in a way in that case, though. So there do seem to be like all kinds of entities involved that have the power to intervene into the world of the living and to take or have mercy upon or to even shield from other death entities. There's a big, there's a huge lore that is just as it's just as complicated as I know I think in the modern day today that we're trying to find all of that um, to try to make sense in a modern folklore of how do we interpret with all of that past, how do we apply it to our modern world so that it makes sense for our new tales, our new um, tales of death lore for the modern world. And I think
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman does a great job with that, and he does it with American Gods as well.
Oh, interesting. I haven't read that one. I need to listen to that one. Um,
That's a good one.
excuse me, but also ironically, another that the idea of the switching between the skeleton kind of like almost like masculine kind of appearance and then this appearance of like a young girl or a
Mhm.
woman in the Marvel comic universe. Death there is said to have two appearances, and that's exactly it. It can look like a skeleton, or it can look like a just a young, beautiful woman, and both wear the same kind of shroud and hood. And but yeah, so that's amazing that they kind of apparently someone there has also been whoever wrote that in that universe was able to there was took that and used that in there as well.
Oh, no doubt.
Huh. Yeah, that's neat. Um, yeah. So what? So yeah, this is that's just kind of opened up. It's really funny because now I'm kind of looking at one of the stories I'm working on in a different way, which is pretty amazing. Well, that I was working on. I haven't worked on it in a while, but it is amazing how all the folklore and then modern, I guess you could call modern folklore, seems to be have connections to actual paranormal activity that's out there. Whether it's people seeing these things, whether it's the person that's going to pass seeing them, or other people near them seeing these figures. And the other thing too about that is the hooded figure, like you brought up earlier. Those don't necessarily always appear just when someone's about to pass. So I wonder, then does that mean they are just passing by when people see them in those cases, or are they checking on the people that see them in those cases, basically gauging how much time they have? Almost like just a status update or whatever. I wonder if there's something to that as well, and if that could be why in some cases people who have these experiences get this sense of foreboding or of possible danger or a negative aspect, but really what it is just this being is so, it gives off so much energy that it's kind of it could be, but it's not necessarily, and that's why when they have these sightings, yes, there's these odd feelings and they're strong, but nothing else happens.
Mhm. Like
So
well, it seems like sometimes people encounter these beings when there's fixing to be a great sickness, and the individual may come down with some type of terminal illness as if the thing brought it, or that the thing is coming to even take away the illness and not take away the soul. And they look terrifying all the same because a type of entity or not, or perhaps they will put on the persona to not frighten the individual, but that they have to deal out a certain amount of natural a natural occurrence, but the entities in charge of doing such things have to do such a terrible thing that they may take on a certain persona of either being um, peaceful and bringing some type of peace and not being frightening at all, or in other instances where, because the work of what's going to be required will begin to take on a look of that might be seen as being terrifying. And so there's something to that. And then that some people, when they encounter these beings, it does seem to be a an omen of something negative to come. For example, before a car accident, or before a plane crash, or before some type of terrible accident that the individual was startled by or did see such a being. And you wonder if it was because they were warning of it, or were they carrying it with them and it caused the event. So there seems to be a lot of confusion about that too. But then there are
yeah,
instances, yeah, where people encounter these beings. They do die, but then they come back. So it's almost as if they ran into the entity, or like they passed unexpectedly and they see this entity, but they don't die because their time is not up yet, or it's not ready for them yet, or however it is, and they come back to their body, and they have accounts of seeing these beings then. But yeah, I don't know.
yeah. David 88 says, I think that maybe the Grim Reaper is there to protect the person in some way because most people I know who have died didn't meet it, but they met a family member. It makes one wonder what its purpose is, and that's true too. My own great grandma apparently said that she saw her sisters uh, before she passed that had also all passed before her.
Yeah,
So I
the
think
instance
that
of being like a guide
yeah
of some type. Yeah, it's we've yeah. Go ahead.
so yeah, it could be that maybe people, the spirits of people that have passed, maybe that's one kind of, not so much a grim reaper but just a guide, like you said earlier, Jen, where certain family members are recruited for a time to go and meet that one person that they knew. Um, and that's why they appear like that before they pass, and then they pass, and then everything seems to calm down. Because I've heard that too, where there's activity leading up to the person's passing, and then after that, nothing else for a while.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know because there's also like 7 days after the person dies. There's accounts of people having paranormal experiences triggered by the death of an individual, and then it seems to they it's like an open doorway. Something came through, certain energies, and they bounced around in the location for a period of time and then dissipated after the, either I don't know if they were reabsorbed or they went back through, but there seems to be something too that death is a portal, and it could explain some of the paranormal activity or that things going haywire or a type of a magnetic field that causes things to like electronics to act up or there to be fires or things like this. So there could be something about that too, I guess. Possibly.
Yeah. And I wonder again if the appearance isn't fixed, then it could be that when people hear going back to NDEs, near death experiences, where when they encounter a figure that is there, it is some kind of an agent of death that does turn them back and say it's not time yet, but they look like just people, or it is odd because APOC in the chat says never heard of any NDEs where a Reaper was involved, but if someone still saw someone else in their experience, then that could have been a version of that too. The appearance really it's so tricky because appearances can be so separate from the experience that they don't even matter, but then other times they seem to matter. It really is amazing. You have to just take everything case by case and see what you can figure out. So, but
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
Because it's so varied. And each culture is going to have a different account of what it seems like. And there seem to be common themes, though. And so we're kind of following the trail of that. We try to. But that's one thing that every human being has in common with each other and the entire living race of all beings on the earth is that we're all born and we all die. And I think that there is there's bound to be parallels in the stories that we tell ourselves and we tell each other about how that encounter plays out and what was seen and what were the signs before it happened, because it's such a hard thing, especially because we have knowledge of that eventually we all go through the same thing. And so I think that that's something that could play into it too. I don't know. But anyway.
yeah. I think that's a good place for me to leave it for tonight. Let's see, just real quick. I'm looking at chat here. David says, when my mother passed, I saw her spirit as a younger version of her looking at me through sliding glass door outside the house. She was trying to get my
That's amazing.
attention. Looked like a swarm of wasps flying, which made up the image of her. That's amazing. Couple
Yeah.
seconds and then gone. Yeah. So there is activity. It just depends. Every case is different. But I think that's a good place to leave it for tonight. So
Hmm.
just because, I mean, we could go on for another hour or two and still probably end up in the same place we're at now.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think I enjoyed it though. I'm glad we talked about it.
yeah, thank you for being here with me and doing this, and great as always, and look forward to having you on the show again sometime.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you brought this up because when you mentioned it, like a month ago, I was like, well, yeah, of course, I want to do that and think about it. But then it went to so many different places. And then sitting here chatting with you about it tonight and hearing the people in the room talking about it too, it seems like it's something we're never going to be quite done with. But yeah, I think it's been a good place to end it. I think you're right.
Yeah, well, I will let you go and end the show here. So I will talk to you later.
Okay, have a great night.
You too. So I think that will do it for the show. Again, so next show will be tomorrow night. Sunday and Tuesday is True Paranormal Stories from the Web. So I will be going all the way through until the last week of December. I've decided I'll only take off 1 week from December, and that'll just be the last week of the month, just for the holidays. And so I will talk to you all tomorrow night on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. If I could say my own name, that'd be good. Take care, everyone. Have a great night.